So I wanted to introduce you to Dr. Williams, who wrote this book.
Good to see you, Wanda.
Good to see you.
It's good to be here and good to be here with my brothers and sisters here in the district. And this grassroots organization is really what's up. And we need more and more of these types of organizations around the country because they are in touch with the people at the grassroots level. So I applaud the House DC under the leadership of Wanda.
I just have a question for you, Dr. Williams. Why is it important to know that the Bible is Black history?
Well, first of all, because it's true, and truth is always important. And growing up, those of us who grew up in church, and we've watched all of the movies that depict Bible, the people of the Bible. We've seen the Ten Commandments, we've seen King of Kings, we've seen the Passion of the Christ. We've seen all of these movies. And then we've seen depictions in our Sunday school literature at our church, our VBS literatures in our churches. And then we walk into the supermarket and we see, especially during the holiday seasons, Christmas and Easter in particular, we see the glossy magazines with images of God, images of Christ, images of the people of the Bible, and all of them are white. And it sort of excludes us from the story. And that was done intentionally so that this is empowering because we see ourselves in the stories. It doesn't change the Bible, but it changes how we understand it. And it is empowering when we come to the reality that our people are the authors and the characters of the Bible. So now when you read it with fresh eyes, you read it with a different hermeneutic and a different understanding, and we see ourselves as a part of the story. And that in and of itself is extremely empowering.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And so one of the things that you shared on an interview that I saw is why you even did this, and one of the things that we're looking at the house is that there's so many young people, and when I say young people, really millennials, that are very disconnected from the church. And that's because the church has always seemed to be not relevant as far as talking about identity. And so my question is, what difference would that make in our lives as Black people, knowing who we are, and particularly what difference would that make for people that are here? We've got some pastors here to connect with the millennial generation who is just kind of tired of the white Jesus, the white Moses, the white this, the white that, and also just not making things more relevant where you see yourself. What difference would that make in their lives?
Well, I wrote this book just for that reason, Wanda. I was at our church. There were young adults, millennials, defecting left and right. I mean, they would leave to go to college and wouldn't come back to the church. And I was taking it personal. I thought it was just a Mount Carmel, Indianapolis thing. And so I started looking into it. I started doing exit interviews because they were kind enough to come back and tell me why it was that they don't go to church anymore. And one of the constant things that kept coming up was they no longer felt like the church had anything to offer them. They were rejecting the scripture. They said it was irrelevant and that the scripture was conspiring with the slave owners to make Black people docile, that it's a white man's book, it's a white man's religion. And then they even questioned the historicity of Jesus. They felt like Jesus was an invention of the Roman government, and he was used also to exploit and to manipulate people, particularly marginalized people. And so all of those are lies. And they're getting it from the internet. And the internet is a powerful tool. We all know that. But there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation on the internet. And to make matters worse, the social media emerged. And so now they're getting disinformation, misinformation off the internet, and they're sharing it on their social media platforms. Social media has algorithms that group people who think alike, who click on the likes, who make certain comments, who visit certain sites. They put us all in one community. So what you essentially have is a community of millennials, a virtual community, a social media community, a cyber community of millennials who are sharing these ideas about God, about Christ, about the church, and it is infectious. I mean, there may be people in this room right now who are a part of that social media network connected that continue to spread disinformation and misinformation about the church, about Christ, and about the scripture. So I had to write this book to correct it. In fact, it started off as a 1-month Bible study with the young adult population in our church, but it stretched out into a 9-month study, and then the book emerged from those studies.
Thank you. So I'm just going to ask one other question so that you can do your PowerPoint. And the last question I had was, how can we incorporate this knowledge for future generations? And before you answer that, as I think about what we're trying to do at the House DC, we've got something called the Monday After, and we're trying to reach out to the community. And one of the things that we're trying to focus on is identity. And we want them to see themselves in scripture, but we also want them to try to ask questions about who I really am, and not basically what somebody told me that I am. The question is, are there things that you could tell us and maybe others here that work with young people that are involved in the church, how you can incorporate this knowledge that can help future generations so that they're not seeing what we saw when we grew up?
Well, one of the things that's important is that we have to correct the hermeneutic. Hermeneutic means the way we interpret the scripture. They don't mind us having the Bible as long as they control how we understand it. Long as they control the hermeneutic, that's the game changer. You can have the Bible, but we're going to tell you what it means. We're going to tell you what it says, and we're going to tell you how to interpret it. The black pulpit, unknowingly, in most cases, we are guilty, and I'm guilty, of using a Euro hermeneutic or a Euro interpretation of the Bible. Every pastor I know has a copy of William Barclay commentary, Matthew Henry commentary, Interpreter's Bible commentary, and every other commentary that's been written by Euro men. And I have them on my shelf today as we speak. And they have told us what salvation is. They have told us what the gospel means. They have told us what the term brother means. And we have accepted their interpretation, their hermeneutic, unexamined. And so when we go to the scripture text and start studying to put together our sermons and our Bible studies, we use these commentaries that are inaccurate interpretations of the biblical text. And so one of the things that we have to get back to is reinterpreting the biblical text according to the way in which it was intended to be interpreted. And that's a slow, methodical, tedious, long-term process because we've got this ingrained in us for so long. It's going to take a long time for us to turn that around.
So Euro, just in case some of y'all wonder what's talking about Euro, it just means white people. But I want you to give an example of a verse. And so some of us have heard verses, and it says, when Jesus says, or Yeshua says, you're to forgive your brother 70 times 7. Can you explain and just give an example of that?
Okay. We were talking earlier, and there was a piece on social media with Ricky Smiley, who, in the wake of the shooting in Dallas, when the white police officer shot our brother in his own apartment, and she was found guilty of murder and was given the minimum 10 years. She'll be out in 5, if not quicker than that. And then we saw the judge come down and hug her. We saw the victim's brother have kind words and that type of thing. And Ricky Smiley was responding to that. And he said he's tired of forgiving. We are always expected to forgive, and this Christian notion of forgiveness. And then he said he believes that the Bible, based upon that, he believed that the Bible was designed to keep us docile and non-resistant to white male supremacy. The issue is not the Bible. Again, it is that hermeneutic. It is the way we understand the Bible. So that when you really understand it, and there is a tremendous book written by Aubrey Hendricks called The Politics of Jesus. And in that, he helps us to understand that Jesus' teachings were contextual, even though they do transcend context and they apply to us today. Originally, his teachings were contextual. He was teaching a community of people, particularly Galileans, who were living under the tyranny of Roman colonial oppression. And he was trying to teach this community of oppressed Black people how to live together in community under the pressure of Roman colonialism. And so when Jesus was talking, I believe that's in Matthew 5, 6, or 7, one of those, the Sermon on the Mount that we know, he was saying to them, forgive your brother. They asked how many times, and he said 70 times 7, you forgive your brother. Now, he's talking to a community. He said, forgive your brother, in essence, as many times as he needs to be forgiven. That's how many times you forgive your brother. And when you look at that word brother from the Aramaic, which is the language that Jesus spoke, it meant a descendant of a common father, of a common people. So what Jesus is saying in that passage, that if your brother offends you, you need to forgive him. That is, if we're going to stay together as a community, if we're going to survive as a community in the midst of oppression and marginalization, I know that they sin against us from the outside of our community, but when we sin against one another from within our community, we have to forgive each other. If we don't, our community will collapse. We see all of these killings, we see all of these shootings, we see all of the violence that we perpetrate against one another, and that's antithetical, that's against what Jesus taught. And many times we see these killings, it is revenge killings, because we have not put into practice what Jesus said that we ought to do in the midst of tyranny, in the midst of oppression. We are an oppressed community. So Jesus said, if we don't forgive each other, then our community will shrink into oblivion. We won't have a community because we would have killed everybody off, and we would have killed each other. So when Jesus tells us to forgive your brother as many times as you need to, he is talking to us in terms of community to try to hold us together, so not only we can stay together, but we can thrive as a community. Because in a real sense, all of us are going to sin against all of us. What if I retaliated every time someone sinned against me, and somebody retaliated against me every time I sinned against them? It will be chaos in our community, which is what we are experiencing today because we have turned our backs on the teaching of Jesus. So it's these types of hermeneutical principles and these types of interpretations that we have to get into the spirit of our people, because in a real sense, when we look at Jesus and his teaching, he is teaching to marginalized people how to live together under the tyranny of colonial oppression is what we are experiencing today. So his teaching would be apropos to us. And it would resonate far better with us if we understood it from that perspective.
Thank you. I'm going to let you just go on. Thank you so much for answering the questions, and I'm going to let you just finish with your presentation. Just move out the way.